Thank you. Okay, good afternoon to one and all, and I want to thank Senators Reed, Shaheen, and Murphy for joining with us today. Now, Senate negotiators continue their work to reach a bipartisan agreement to protect U.S. national security, strengthen our border, provide critical aid to Ukraine, Israel, humanitarian aid for Palestinians in Gaza, and our friends and partners abroad. Though we have made significant progress, there's still more work to do. I've been in close contact with Leader McConnell. The White House and Senator Murphy here knows all too well the negotiators every single step of the way. Phone companies making a lot of money from our calls among each other. Though through these negotiations, I know we don't pay for dimes anymore. I'm in the old days with dimes. I remember dial phones. When I went to college, I had to make an appointment to make a long-distance call to call my parents. That's how the world has changed. Anyway, nice to meet you all. All right. Through these negotiations, Democrats have shown their willingness to compromise and work together to get a deal. Now, this work is not easy. In fact, it's one of the hardest things the Senate has undertaken, but also one of the most important. Of course, there are many on the hard right who are desperately trying to undermine the negotiations even before they finish. Many of these MAGA Republicans are taking their cues from Donald Trump directly. These are the same folks who for months said, what's happening on the border is an emergency, you've got to act. And yet now, when real, meaningful, and bipartisan legislation could potentially be within reach, they're doing everything they can to kill it. Here in the Senate, we have the obligation to tune out the hard-right chaos and let the negotiators finish their work. Too much hangs in the balance for our national security, for our border, for our friends around the world. That is especially true of the war in Ukraine. Almost 2 years ago, Putin commenced his illegal invasion, and the war now stands at a turning point. And one place McConnell and I see eye to eye on is how crucial it is to aid Ukraine. It's a moment in history. It's a pivot moment. If we don't do it, did you read this morning that now Russia's been even further buttressed with armaments from North Korea? And within a short matter of time, Ukraine could be defeated, and the world will change, and every American will feel the consequence of that for years to come. So this is a crucial fulcrum moment where we must do our best and stand together. So, to my Senate colleagues, Democrat and Republican, the matter's quite simple. As President Zelensky told us, if Congress fails to act, Ukraine faces defeat. And don't just listen to him. Listen to the Russian state TV praising the U.S. inability to pass funding, praising Republicans and Leader McConnell, they said, for their role in holding up funding for Ukraine. And make no mistake, as I said, this is just a crucial moment. We feel this passionately. This is a moment when the actual substance makes a huge difference, not the number of phone calls, and not what you hear, from the hard right. No, it's a crucial moment. We dare not go down the road of defeat. We dare not shrink from our sacred obligation to defend democracy in its hour of need. Our friends in Ukraine need our help, and we must answer the call. Senator Reed.
Well, I want to echo Senator Schumer's strong support, indeed our whole caucus support for the supplemental, but particularly aid to Ukraine. And let me take a moment to highlight what's at stake here. Very simply, if Ukraine loses, the United States loses, because Putin will not be stopped by undermining Ukraine. He has a vision which, if we allow him to proceed, encompasses other countries, encompasses NATO countries. And if NATO is involved, then we are involved. I would rather send the resources in the supplemental than young Americans to contest Russia. Our economic interests are at stake. and so is, I suggested, the future of our strategic partnerships. And as Senator Schumer mentioned, it was reported last week that Ukraine is running out of artillery ammunition while the Russians are being supplied by the North Koreans. It's imperative that we step up and provide Ukraine with the ammunition, with the platforms, with the tools they need to defend themselves. Last week we had a very productive meeting, a bipartisan meeting, bicameral meeting with the President. And I hope that leads to successful bipartisan action. President Biden has repeatedly made it clear that the United States stands resolutely behind Ukraine and our other international partners. His thoughtful leadership and his commitment has been truly inspiring. And as I said before, Congress has a responsibility to pass the supplemental, not out of the goodness of our hearts, not out of some sense of just, give them some money, et cetera, the problem will go away, but for the American people. It makes America safer and stronger. It advances key security and humanitarian interests. It reduces the threat of armed conflict from spiraling and spreading, and that is one of the major concerns we have at the moment. It keeps our commitment to allies and partners. America has been and is the most trusted nation in the world. That's why we have allies. If we abandon Ukraine, then we will lose the trust of many other nations. We have to move forward. We have to invest in our industrial base. We have to do many things. But the first step is to support the people of Ukraine in their struggle against autocracy. We must do that, and I urge all my colleagues to join us.
Senator Shaheen.
Well, thank you, Senator Schumer and Reed and Murphy. I'm here really to echo what we've heard from Senator Schumer and Reed. We are nearly 2 years into this war in Ukraine, and despite all of the Russian missiles that have been fired, all of the barbaric attacks, Ukraine continues to stand. I had the opportunity on Friday to visit a refugee center in New Hampshire, and I met with several Ukrainian women who were here. One woman was very thankful that she had been allowed to go back to the funeral of her brother who had died in the war. Another woman and her children were from Mariupol, and they talked about the horrors at the end of the siege of Mariupol. No, Putin isn't just waging war against Ukraine. He's targeting the very foundation of democracies around the world. And make no mistake, this war seems like a long way off for so many people in the United States, but this is about what happens here in America as well. I have 4 grandsons. I don't want 2 or 3 years or 5 years from now to see my 4 grandsons have to go off to fight a war in Europe or Asia because we didn't take the action that we should be taking right now to support Ukraine. Because make no mistake, it's not just Putin who's looking at what the United States is doing. It's Xi, it's North Korea, it's Iran, it's everyone who wants to undermine the democratic world. So our action now is critical. That's why we must support this supplemental and get it across the finish line. Thank you.
Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Senator Schumer. We've gotten to the point where the crisis for Ukraine is not theoretical, it's not prospective, it is here and now. Reports suggest that on some days, Ukraine is firing 1/4 to 1/2 the number of rounds that the Russian military is. That is a recipe for disaster. That is a recipe for Kyiv to be a Russian city sometimes soon. The whole world is watching and asking a simple question. Does the United States stand up for its friends? Does the United States stand up for democracy? Does the United States stand up for the preservation of the post-World War II order? Or do we turn our back on our friends, on democracy, and on international norms? The time to act on the supplemental is now. We have been at these negotiations for 4 months. We are at the finish line. We still have a handful of issues to resolve, but there is no reason for us to wait weeks to get this bill on the floor. And so I am hopeful that our Republican colleagues will work with us to wrap up the supplemental, both the policy changes and the funding necessary to effectuate the policy changes in the next few days so that we can answer the call for Ukraine.
Questions? Wait, let me get it. I try to get you. Some people I've never called on before I call on the usual suspects.
How much time should members expect to review the text when it comes out, and will you allow amendment votes on the supplemental?
Okay, on the review the text, we will give members time to review the text before we go to the floor, that's for sure. And as for amendments and how to deal with the floor, Leader McConnell and I will have to work that out once we've come to an agreement. Yes, yes, ma'am.
Is the amount of money for Ukraine in the national security supplemental, the amount that the president requested, is that up for negotiation?
Look, one of the things we have to discuss is the appropriations process, because there will be a need for new money, and we're all discussing how much is there. There are some disagreements. We're trying to come to an agreement.
Given that House Republicans have already indicated, many of them, that they won't accept any compromise, and that Speaker Johnson is facing pressure from Trump to not accept anything beneath the perfect deal, why not include him in the negotiations now? Get a buy-in from him now before you cut a deal here.
Well, Speaker Johnson at the moment says the only way he's going to pass a bill is H.R. 2. As I've said to him repeatedly and publicly till I'm blue in the face, you can't do this unless it's bipartisan, and that's not a bipartisan solution. Senator McConnell and I both believe that the Senate moving first with hopefully as good a margin as we can get will then help us prevail upon the House to do something bipartisan as well. Yes.
Do you expect the border funding in this bill to rise above $14 billion with the changes? And will the does the text of the bill have to be out by tomorrow in order to begin this week on the floor?
Okay. On the first question, border funding is something we're discussing. I'm not going to get into the details of negotiation. And as for we hope to do that, there are still moving pieces. We hope to get it done as soon as possible. Yes.
You talked about some of these, as you termed the MAGA Republicans, who just want to kill this bill no matter what. But there are some on your side, Democrats, progressives, liberals, who are very concerned, and they don't want a deal too. What do you say to them? How do you weigh this out between those on both sides who want to kill the deal?
We're trying to get the best bill we can that solves problems at the border, funds Palestinian aid and humanitarian aid, helps fund Israel, and above all, gets money to Ukraine. And we're all going to have to, no one's going to get everything they want, but we're all going to have to pull together for the good of the country. Someone back there. Yeah.
Follow up on the timing of this. How long specifically in terms of weeks? Do you have a specific number? How long you'd give?
We want to get this done as soon as possible, but there are still moving pieces, and we have yet to come to a final agreement.
On AI,
Thank you, everybody.